Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sasha Ruane Borges-Ho. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a psychology associate at Student Counseling Services at Iowa State University. And I'd like to welcome you to the second part of our Stress Management for Finals Week live workshop. So our first live workshop was a real success. As you may notice, I've learned how to format a couple of things and hope that this format allows you to be able to see the full presentation without having any oh, wait, now I'm seeing that we're having some double audio here, so let me just fix that before we keep going on. I can hear myself, and that just feels strange. Oh, boy. Not sure where that's coming from. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Done. These technical glitches are always fun, especially in a live format. So as you can see, I've learned how to format a couple of things. My hope is that by having kind of the camera separated and having the presentation a little bit more visible, you're able to see all the detail without having any other obstructions there. It's also just kind of nice to be able to see the campus when you're not able to see the campus on the reg like you normally might be able to. So during this workshop today, we're going to talk about some specific strategies for managing stress. So we talked a little bit about what stress is during our first part. This time, we're going to talk about some specific strategies that we can make use of that help us manage stress that's already there, as well as help us manage stress before it gets to a point that starts to feel overwhelming. Some of this will feel a little bit like review. We're kind of going to fly through some of the review parts of it, and then we'll kind of get into a few more specifics and some resources. So for our presentation today, our objectives are learning about some evidence-based stress management techniques, practicing a couple of stress management techniques, and certainly having some resources to be able to do that, and then looking over some resources like student counseling services that are available to you. So just as a quick review. Stress. What is stress? We talked a little bit about this, as stress being sort of the alarm system of the body. It's the alarm system that activates us so that we can deal with a stressor. During something like exams, finals week, maybe you have a lot of projects that you're working on, your body needs that energy. Your brain needs that energy to be able to function optimally. So stress, neither positive nor negative, not necessarily pleasant or unpleasant. It really is just the body's way of giving us energy so that we can cope with a situation. So you may think then, okay, so stress, finals week, that seems to kind of go hand in hand, and you're right. Finals week very often for many of us can feel really overwhelming, or it can feel stressful. It can suddenly feel like, wow, I've got so much that I need to fit into this 1 week or into a week and a half. And we know that finals week, though, we have like a specific week during which we kind of call that finals week. Finals week very often sort of happens before finals week and then during finals week. So you might notice that your stress levels are a little bit higher right now. Maybe you're irritable, or maybe you are feeling overwhelmed. Maybe it feels like you're a bit anxious or nervous. Maybe it's hard to like turn off your brain. Maybe you notice that you're more hungry or less hungry than usual, sleeping less or needing more sleep, feeling more fatigued. All of these could be signs that you're feeling stressed out. So some specific stress management techniques that could be useful for you that we're going to be going over today include some mindfulness, so being aware of your current experience, progressive muscle relaxation, which is a strategy that you can use to not only relax your body, but it also kind of allows you to become a bit more aware of where you might be holding tension. Biofeedback. Biofeedback is a service that we offer at Student Counseling Services that right now is not available, but once we're all back on campus, will be available again. It, however, is also something you can do at home, and so we'll talk a little bit about those ways that you can do that on your own from home using some simple apps, things like that. Deep breathing is another strategy. There's a short video on our SES Skills Corner on this channel about some breathing techniques, and we'll talk a little bit about why it is that it works and what's really great about it. Then prioritizing, a strategy for prioritizing your time and kind of taking some things off of your plate that maybe feel like they don't need to be there. So what is mindfulness, or we can also call it situational awareness? Mindfulness is intentional awareness that we are paying attention to or drawing to our experience. Our experience includes things like what we're thinking, what we're feeling emotionally, what we're feeling in our body, what sensations we're experiencing, and noticing the here and now, the moment. What very often happens is that when we're not faced with a bear chasing us, or we're not in an immediate situation where we need to be on all the time, part of our brain that goes on is called the default mode network. The default mode network is kind of what it sounds like. It's sort of your brain going kind of on standby. Maybe you're driving, or maybe you are going through the motions of your typical morning routine. The default mode network is what turns on when you kind of don't need to be paying full attention all the time, where sure, you need to be cognizant and aware, and you don't need to be here and now all the time. The default mode network is often what's active when we find ourselves time sliding. Maybe our thoughts are bringing us into the future. Maybe our thoughts are bringing us into the past. Maybe our thoughts are bringing us to fears or sadness or regrets or worst case scenarios or contingency planning. Our thoughts can kind of bring us all over the place, and while we're busy thinking about all those other things, we're not here in the moment. So mindfulness is kicking that default mode network in the butt and making sure that we are here, we are using our frontal lobes, we are present in the moment and paying attention to this current moment and all the information that our bodies, our brains are processing. One way that we can do that is by paying attention to our senses, and so we'll practice that in a moment here. But I want to draw your attention to some kind of key features of mindfulness. When we're engaging in mindfulness, we want to make sure that we are intentionally paying attention. We don't just kind of want to be in our default autopilot mode. We want to be intentionally really processing information that's coming into us. Whether that's information from our senses, whether that's the thoughts that we're having at the moment, whether that's emotions or feelings, we want to be able to pay close attention, pay attention to the detail, and not just kind of take it for granted. Mindfulness also means it's intentional, it's on purpose, that we are doing it one thing at a time. It's not really on purpose if we're kind of feeling ourselves bouncing, our attention between multiple different things at once. It's kind of like when we're trying to multitask. Some people swear that they're great multitaskers, but what we know about the human brain is we're not so good at multitasking. Really paying attention to one thing at a time is the best way to make sure that you are making full use of your frontal lobes and that you are really bringing yourself back to the moment, that you're not allowing fears about the future or regrets about the past to interfere with your functioning in the moment. You also want to make sure that what it is you're paying attention to, let's say it's your thoughts, that you're not getting caught up in the thought. So let's say the thought is fear about how you're going to do on an exam. You might, as you're trying to practice mindfulness, you might notice, like I'm having a lot of thoughts about this one exam. I'm thinking I'm going to fail, or I'm thinking I'm not going to do well, or I'm thinking I need to get that, make sure that I at least get this grade on it so that I can get the grade that I want in the class. Paying attention to those thoughts is not necessarily just saying, oh, I'm thinking about the future, and so I'm going to keep thinking about the future. Paying attention to those thoughts also means that you recognize, but I'm actually here in this moment. I'm not writing that exam right now. What can I control right now? I'm having that thought. Okay. And in this moment, I'm sitting in this room, or I'm laying down on this surface, or I'm looking at this thing. That's what being in the present moment is. It's not just kind of feeding where those thoughts are taking us. When we're being mindful, we also want to be really intentional that we're being mindful non-judgmentally. That might be really hard because we love to be judgmental, as Brene Brown says. We love to be judgmental. It's also just part of our wiring. That's how we're wired. We are wired to make quick assessments of our environment, of other people, of our experiences, quick assessments about how to cope with certain experiences. That's how we're wired. We're wired to be judgmental. And it's intended to help keep us safe. That's the purpose that it serves. Of course, if the thing that we're doing is that we're judging what our thoughts are, or we're finding ourselves judging how we're feeling, it becomes less useful. So if my thoughts are, I'm worried I'm going to fail this exam, and I immediately start judging myself and thinking, well, I'm so stupid for thinking that, well, that's not really going to make me feel better. That's actually just going to make me feel worse. And that can quickly become a spiral of being really harsh on myself. That can become a spiral of just continuing to be judgmental. So when we're paying attention and we're being mindful, we want to maintain kind of this neutral stance. It's almost like this researcher stance. We're observing. We are simply observing. We're not passing judgment on what we're observing or noticing about our experience. We're just naming it, describing it. So to practice this, we can try a 5 senses mindfulness exercise. This exercise, very often people, sorry, I'm looking to the left here. I'm just kind of making sure that I've got, trying to make sure that I can take a look at my slides at the same time as we're kind of going through the presentation as well. Mindfulness can be achieved if we're paying attention to our senses. Now, this particular exercise very often can be considered what we call a grounding exercise. And so a grounding exercise is what helps us stay in the moment. Grounding literally meaning bringing us back here. It can also help us just practice how to be mindful. So with this exercise, I'd like you to take a moment, find a position that feels comfortable. Maybe you need to kind of shift in your seat a little bit. Maybe you want to let your eyes close or let your eyes sort of gently soften their gaze on a particular point or place around you right now. Just take a moment, kind of get back in touch with yourself. Get back in touch with your body, with what your senses are giving you. With this particular exercise, we want to make sure we make use of all 5 of our senses. So the first sense that we often will work with is sight, because very often our sight is giving us a lot of information. As you look around your surroundings, pick 1 or 2 things to describe. As I'm looking around here, I'm seeing that I have a glass of water next to me. And so when we're describing and being mindful of our environment, it might look something like this. So I can see a glass of water next to me. I see that the glass of water, it's tall, it's cylindrical, the glass is clear, but it also has some condensation around it, so it's just a little bit cloudy. As I look at the glass, it looks like the ice is melting inside the glass and in the water, and as I look through the glass, it looks like the picture that's behind it looks kind of blurry and distorted. The glass looks like it would be smooth if I were to touch it. It's reflecting the light on the edges especially. It's got sort of a thicker rim. It looks like it's pretty solid. So you want to describe what you're seeing. And if you take a few moments and look around your surroundings, you can pause here and just see if you can describe things that are in your environment. This video will also be available and accessible after the live feed, so you will have a chance to kind of review it as well and catch up. The next thing we want to do is we want to pay attention to what it is that we can feel with our sense of touch. So maybe we pick something up that we like the feel of, or maybe we feel how our clothing feels on our body, or maybe we feel how our posture feels in the moment. You know, if I have a mug next to me right here, it's a Game of Thrones one, House Stark, what? I might feel this mug and kind of describe what I feel. And as an example, I can feel the etchings of the Stark symbol and where the etching is. It feels like it's engraved, like it's etched into the ceramic. The ceramic itself has been painted and treated and is really smooth. It feels really solid in my hands. It doesn't feel like a fragile mug at all. It feels really firm. The temperature of it right now is quite cold. It was warm at one time. It's quite cold at the moment. And it feels like at the bottom, it's not as well finished at the bottom. It doesn't have that same veneer finish or varnished finish. It has sort of the rougher ceramic finish to it, like a little bit porous. You might use your sense of touch in describing how your clothing feels on you. So you could say or notice something like, my socks feel like tight, but tight in sort of a comforting way around my feet. I can feel the softness of the cotton. I can feel the elastic. It's a little bit tighter at the top on my ankle. So you might describe something like that. Then we want to make use of our sense of sound. If you take a moment right now, just pay attention to what it is you can hear in your home, in the room where you are, or wherever it is that you are. You might notice that there are a lot of different sounds kind of coming through. What do you notice? And describe in detail what you're hearing. If you notice yourself kind of pulling away from the moment by like comparing sounds to things you've heard before or how they make you feel, in a moment you can describe how you're feeling, but just notice how you're describing it as well. Then we would want to, for our next step, start paying attention to our sense of smell. Sometimes I like to have something nearby, like a candle, or maybe my clothing has just been washed and I can smell a laundry detergent on it. Describe a couple of things that you smell in your environment and describe in detail. What do you notice about that smell? Then, finally, we want to describe at least one thing that we can taste. And so maybe you can taste the last meal you had, or a sip of coffee or soda that you just had. Maybe you don't taste much at all, or maybe you notice maybe I need some mouthwash because it's feeling a little stale in there. Just pay attention and notice. When we're doing this exercise, we often call this one the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game. And the reason that we call it that is that because we try to describe 5 things that we see, 4 things that we can feel with our sense of touch, 3 things that we can hear in our environment, 2 things we smell, and 1 thing we can taste. Though the number itself is not the most important part of it, it can help give you some structure to this exercise that helps you pay attention in the moment. Because you're following a structure, you're not just allowing yourself to sort of pay attention to whatever comes to mind, because very often that means that the default mode network is going to kick right back in. You're going to go on autopilot, and you might find yourself worrying about the future, regretting the past. So that structure can be really useful, but it's not a strict structure. If it feels really important to do, 5 things that you see, and you can only really describe like 3 things that you're feeling with your sense of touch, that's okay too. That structure is just there to kind of help you out, but is not meant to be an obstacle to being able to get something out of this experience. Our next strategy is progressive muscle relaxation. Progressive muscle relaxation involves intentionally tensing and then relaxing different muscle groups at a time. What this does is that it helps us recognize where we might be holding some tension. One place where we can sometimes hold tension that we might forget about, or that is not always the first thing that you think about when you think about your body holding tension, is in your eyebrows and your forehead, as well as in your jaw. So you might notice as you're going through this exercise, like, oh, I found it hard to tense because it turns out I was already tensing. But now that I'm intentionally trying to release that tension, it does feel different. Progressive muscle relaxation, very often you start at the top of your head, or you start with your forehead and face, or parts of your face. There are a lot of different versions of progressive muscle relaxation. Some of them will break down the muscle groups into much smaller parts, and some will kind of keep them much more grouped. So like keeping your head as one group of muscles and tensing everything in your face. That's a great screen tap right there. I should make that the thumbnail for it. They might group all of your facial muscles together, or they might break them up into different parts. And you can see here on the screen that there's, this is just another way that you can think about the different muscle groups, starting with your forehead, going to your eyes, your mouth, your chest, stomach, your entire right arm and hand, and then your entire left arm and hand. So you could break it down kind of in a way that makes sense for you, and you might come across a lot of different versions of this that break it down into different groups. It's okay to Kind of figure out what works for you. But generally speaking, you want to start at the top of your head, work your way down to your feet. One thing that can be really useful about progressive muscle relaxation is, yes, becoming aware of how it is and where it is that we're holding tension, but B, also learning how to relax that so that when you find yourself in a tense moment, even if you're not intentionally practicing PMR, you already know what it feels like to both tense and release a certain muscle group so that maybe you're at your desk, you notice your head's really hurting or you notice your shoulders are really hurting. You could just make use of tensing your shoulders and back and then releasing that. Like, oh yeah, I was holding a lot of tension there. Often you can do this while you're sitting down. You can do this while you're laying down. Generally speaking, you don't want to be standing because if you're standing, then your muscles are going to be tensing because they're helping to keep you upright. Laying down is a really good way to do it, especially if you're about to go to bed. Biofeedback. As I mentioned, biofeedback is a service that SES offers. At the moment, with us all being remote, it's not being currently offered in person. Check our website out. Check back in on this channel. We're likely to make announcements about that just to let you know kind of when those services are back on. But biofeedback is not just something that you have to access at a center like SES. You can actually practice biofeedback on your own. But before we even get there, what is biofeedback? Biofeedback basically is a way of using technology of some kind to give us information about how our body is doing so that we can then change it. So imagine gamifying your body or your vital signs. Your body becomes a controller, and the game, in some cases, is literally a screen where it looks like a game, where part of the objective is to lower your heart rate, for example, lower your blood pressure. And the game is the visual aid that tells you when you're actively doing that effectively. But essentially what you're learning to do is you're learning how to change your body's responses. That's it. You're just learning how to change our body's responses, which are often automatic, and we often don't feel a lot of control over them. But we actually can. We can have quite a lot of influence on how fast, for example, our heart is beating. We can have a lot of control over how intense, that feeling of anxiety can feel in our body, and we can elicit a lot of calm in our body. So how might we do this? Well, at home, you can make use of something like a Fitbit or some other heart rate monitor to be able to monitor how you're doing. Very often things like Fitbit or other heart rate monitors will give you like a baseline and tell you what your typical resting heart rate is at. But they will also give you kind of moment to moment. So let's say it's a Fitbit and you're wearing it. Very often if you kind of scroll through all the different options and depending on the model you have, you can actually see what your live heart rate is at that moment. And paying attention to that number, you can actively, by taking deep breaths and practicing some of these strategies while you're doing biofeedback, you can actually get to a place where you lower that heart rate. Once you're back on campus, check us out at Student Counseling Services. The screenshots that you're seeing are some of the video games that you can use when you're doing biofeedback. It's a way of monitoring essentially how your heart rate is going, what that looks like. And the purpose in one of them at least is to open up the lotus flower. And so it can kind of gamify your body, gamify your vital senses to some degree. So it can kind of also be a little bit fun because it's not, it's bringing your attention to something that feels a little bit less abstract than like your heart rate when you don't have a button to press for your heart rate. So it can kind of make it a little bit more concrete, a little bit easier to try and conceptualize what you're trying to do with it. Deep breathing. Deep breathing is one of my favorite stress management techniques, in part because it's totally free. It's accessible to absolutely every one of us. There are a lot of different ways that you can practice deep breathing, and it can be done anywhere. Our breath gives us life. It helps oxygenate our body and our blood. That oxygen is carried to different parts of our body so that parts of our body can work and function properly. It brings oxygen to our brains so that our brains can really be working optimally, that we can start seeing, the performance, let's say, on an exam that we want to be able to see. Oxygen is so important for our bodies, but the rate at which we breathe is actually really, really important. And the depth or the volume of air that we're taking in as we're breathing can really change the way that our body is functioning. So what we may call, sometimes these terms are kind of used interchangeably: diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing, calm breathing, just taking deep breaths. You might have heard that as well. There are a lot of different kind of terms that are all really synonymous for the same thing. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to intentionally and at a slower pace take in as much air as we can. We want to be able to kind of stretch our lungs in the same way that you might stretch out a balloon before you actually blow into it. So we want to be able to take in a lot of air, and we want to be able to slow the pace at which we're breathing. Part of the reason that we want to be able to slow the pace at which we're breathing is that very often when we're feeling overwhelmed, two things will happen. One, we start to take shallow breaths. Two, those shallow breaths often tend to be pretty fast. We don't take shallow breaths slowly. We usually take shallow breaths pretty quickly. I'm just going to mute that so that we don't get another ding going. We tend to take them pretty quickly. And what happens is that we're sending a message to our body. I mean, part of that is kind of just happening automatically, that we're shortening our breath, or maybe we're even holding our breath. That's an ancient coping strategy, is to hold our breath when we're feeling overwhelmed. What happens is that kind of heightens. Part of it is like a symptom of our body putting on the alarm system, and so all of that kind of slows, or rather quickens, our breath quickens, and our breaths become more shallow. It's a symptom, but it also kind of perpetuates the alarm system in our body. By doing diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing, what we're trying to do is that we're actually signaling to our body, hey, we can turn down the alarms. And sometimes that's what you're needing. Maybe your body's been in alarm mode for a really long time, and all you're really needing right now is just to access some calm. So what we're doing when we take those deep breaths is activating the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, alarm system. Parasympathetic nervous system turns off that alarm or turns it down. As we're taking slow, deep breaths, we want to make sure that we're taking them at a relatively consistent rate. We want to make sure that we're taking it slowly. We want to make sure that we're adding pauses. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. You might have heard of like 4 square breathing. You might have heard of things like a butterfly hug breathing. There's a lot of different names for it and a lot of different ways that this can be practiced. And they're all pretty effective in their own right. One that I like is the Calm Breathe bubble. And so we've got a link there, and you can see in the description down below that we've got several links for different kinds of breathing as well that you can check out. 2-3 times a day, take 30 seconds to just take some deep breaths in through your nose, hold for a few seconds, and release through your mouth. Pause again, and then take the air back in, maybe for 30 seconds. You can do this anywhere. Part of the reason I recommend doing this 2-3 times a day, maybe even when you're not feeling overwhelmed, is that we want to practice the coping skill before we need it. I have a good friend and colleague who says, it's kind of like stop, drop, and roll. Chances are you learned stop, drop, and roll when you were pretty young. Chances are you learned it, if you had a chance to learn it, you learned it when you weren't on fire. And the reason that you practice it so young is so that if it happened and when you needed it, you already had it down. You knew what you were doing. You knew what it felt like. You already knew the chant, stop, drop, and roll. So I always recommend practicing all of these different strategies multiple times, practicing it before you're even feeling anxious. While you're, on a scale of 1 to 10, don't just practice it once you're at a 10 where you're feeling the most amount of stress you've ever felt. Practice it when you're at a 2. Practice it when you're at a 3. And that way when you are needing it at a 6, at a 7, at an 8, you've already been practicing it. Your body already knows how to respond to it in that moment. Prioritizing. It is not uncommon to get to this time of year where it's finals week. Maybe you've known since like first or second week when you looked over all of your syllabi, you already knew that this week or this past week and this week were going to be really challenging. But then you get to this week and suddenly it's not just those assignments or those exams that are on your to-do list. There's also all those other life things that are on your list. What I like to recommend is prioritizing what is on your to-do list. There are some things that are kind of just really important to get sleep. We talked about that last time. Really important that you're having 3 meals a day, fueling your body so that it can perform at its best. Making sure that you are still maintaining some contact with people. I know that right now we're socially distancing and maybe you're using video chat or phone calls to be able to nurture relationships. Really important that we're continuing those things. And sometimes when we really list out everything we feel like we have on our plate, we start to realize that there might be a lot of things on that list that maybe don't need to be there. Or maybe they don't need to be there right now. Or maybe if they are there, they can be something that you can get some support around. Or maybe you don't have any control over them at all. I like to do a not to-do list. This list was produced by Sage Grayson. I believe she's a psychotherapist who has a website. There are a lot of different, she's a life coach. She has a lot of resources on her website and I believe provides services. But there's a lot of free resources on the website as well, including the not to-do list. I love the not to-do list. With the not to-do list, you basically list everything you feel like you have on your plate. And slowly, you start to move those things over onto the right side. Maybe there are some things on everything that's on your plate. Maybe there are some things that are listed there that you're not going to be able to move. Maybe it isn't another person's responsibility or something you can choose to never have to do. And very often when we list everything that's on our plate, we notice that there's a good portion of them that we are able to move over to the right. Sometimes we're taking on responsibilities that maybe they don't need to be ours, or they don't need to be solely ours. Maybe you're living with roommates right now, and one of the responsibilities you feel like is on your shoulders is that you're always doing cleanup. Maybe you're cleaning up their dishes. Maybe that's actually not your responsibility, and maybe that's one thing that you can take off of your plate. There's also often stuff that we put on our plate that's just out of our control and right now is a time when a lot of that is happening. We don't have a ton of control over what's happening during this pandemic or all the different recommendations from the CDC and from the government, and we don't have control over that, and we definitely don't have control over how other people are behaving during this time. And so we may find ourselves frustrated with other people or frustrated with things that we just can't control. And maybe there's some of that can end up on that part of the list. Maybe there are things that are on your to-do list or on your plate right now that are big drains. And it doesn't mean that they may not be important or that you don't ever have to do them, but maybe there's something about the things that drain you that you could change. I'm trying to think of something that could feel really draining. You could have a friendship, for example, with someone who's maybe they're going through a really, really, really hard time right now. And maybe one of the things that feels draining is that they're turning to you often, and maybe you don't have as much time for them as they're asking for, and it feels really hard to say no, or it feels really hard to say, I'm here for you and I love you and I'm so sorry for everything that's going on in your life right now. I support you, and right now I need to make sure that I get to bed. Or maybe the thing that feels really draining right now is spending several hours a day reading the news, or maybe you're on social media and you're reading the news through social media or reading other people's reactions. It's not that I'm suggesting that those things are not important. It can be really important to be there for someone, especially someone that we care about in a relationship that we really want to nurture. And there may be times that that responsibility or that engagement, the way we're engaging with it, is actually draining us. Maybe we don't need to spend 2 hours on social media or on the news. Maybe we want to set a limit on what that looks like. And so anything that ends up in that section of the to-do list or the not to-do list could be something that you want to shift around. Finally, stuff that doesn't need to get done. I love that box because it always feels to me like everything needs to get done, and it needs to get done now. It's not even just that it needs to get done by the end of the week. It just feels like, oh, but it's not done now. I meant to reorganize my entire closet. It has to get done today. And of course, I might have a lot of competing pulls on my time and demands on my energy that make that maybe a little bit unrealistic right now. Or maybe that's not the thing that I need to prioritize. Maybe reorganizing my closet, maybe I can give it a couple of weeks. Maybe I don't need to do that right now. Maybe it actually never has to get done. If you're able to kind of function with the way your closet is right now, it doesn't feel like a big source of stress, you just kind of wish it looked a little bit different, maybe that doesn't ever need to get done. And it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a good idea to do it. Maybe it would. And it can be really, really relieving to let go of the should. I should reorganize my closet. If you change that to, well, it might be a good idea to. It might be a good idea to reorganize my closet, or maybe it might be a good idea for me to, get in one extra day of physical activity per week, or maybe it might be a good idea to do this or that, whatever it is that might be coming up for you. Instead of the I should, maybe turning that into, it might be a good idea to. And in that way, things that maybe feel like it would be really useful to get done, maybe turning it into, it might be a good idea to, makes it something that doesn't need to get done, or at least doesn't need to get done now. You can check out this PDF in the description, in the link in the description down below. I wanted to make sure that that was available to you so that you could check that out and see how it works out for you. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get rid of everything on your to-do list, but you might find that it can be a real relief to let go of some things that felt like they were pressing or felt like they're shoulds, when maybe it would be a good idea to. Some additional resources for you during this time. I know that I've talked about this. I mean, I work for student counseling services. So I'm a little bit biased, but this is a resource for you. It's still available. Monday through Friday, 8 to 3, we have our new client consultations. We are doing this via phone. I know it says walk-in there. Actually, I forgot to adjust that. They are not walk-in services. Our offices are currently not open, but by giving us a call at that phone number, you can get started with services. We have a couple of good news or some announcements that we're going to be making very shortly about how services are going to kind of shift in the summer months and during the summer semester. So just stay tuned for that. In the meantime, you can continue to ask to speak with a counselor 8 to 3, especially if you're looking to be able to have a couple of follow-up check-ins with a therapist. 8 to 3, that's when to give us a ring. If you are in crisis, if you are worried about keeping yourself or others safe, give us a call. Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, we are available. In the description down below, you'll also see some other crisis resources that are available to you 24/7. So if it is not during business hours, you can make use of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can make use of the ISU Crisis Text Line. You can also call 911 or go to your local emergency room. For the ISU Crisis Text Line, you can be anywhere in the country, so you do not have to be in Ames or in Iowa to make use of that number. So you just text ISU to 741-741. There's also some online apps that can be really useful. Last time I talked a little bit about Stop, Breathe, and Think, although I think I said it in backwards. I think I said Stop, Think, and Breathe. I think I think of it that way because I like to do the breathing but after the thinking, but I mean, in the end, Stop, Breathe, and Think is the name. That's a really great app. There's a couple of others. I mean, there's so many different apps out there right now that you can make use of for meditations, for mindfulness, for just having those moments to be able to stop and take a self-care moment. There's also a few websites. Again, you're going to see, I believe, all of these links down in the description below. Just to different YouTube videos, as well as some helpful websites that have some additional resources that you can access. So the belly breathing that's there through that breathing bubble that you can follow along with. There's several different versions of that one. Stop, Breathe, and Think, the mobile application, also has a YouTube channel with some really great videos around self-help, around meditation, that kind of thing. I believe the 4 Square Breathing link is one of their videos, but their whole channel has a lot there as well. And then, of course, our not to-do list is there as well. This is finals week. You're in the last stretch of this semester. Granted, a really challenging, strange, maybe even a surprising semester where maybe there was also a lot about this experience that felt okay for you as well. There's not one right way to react right now. I know a lot of people are talking about how this has been really hard, and there might also have been some parts of this that have felt like a blessing in disguise somehow, or it's been nice to be able to be home. There's not one right way to be reacting right now, but just knowing that our social distancing efforts are likely to be challenging and difficult. It makes it harder to be able to maintain relationships, and certainly makes it so that you have to maintain those relationships in really different ways. Being separated from campus, routines being disrupted, all of these things can feel really overwhelming. And finals week kind of just added to that, and they continue to add to that until you find yourself kind of like finishing your countdown to the very last assignment you have to hand in, or the very last exam you'll be walking out of, or stepping away from, more likely. This is a really challenging, unprecedented time, and finding moments where you can take care of yourself and really think about what it is that you are needing is really important. And it's not something that we necessarily always think about. It's not necessarily an easy thing to think about, and sometimes it feels really uncomfortable to spend a lot of time thinking about taking care of ourselves, because maybe we're not used to it. Maybe we're just kind of used to pushing through it, and it feels indulgent somehow to spend time thinking about what our needs are and taking care of ourselves. What I hope you hear from today is that you are worth taking that time. You are worth being well. No one can have more control or more responsibility over your wellness than you can. And there are ways of asking for support in that process. You're not alone in that process. But making sure that you're attending to your own well-being helps you engage in other parts of your life at kind of optimal levels of performance in a way that feels better, so that you can continue to engage in all those roles that you value, all those activities that you value. And the best way to do that is to really spend some time thinking about what you're needing and investing that time in you, and making sure that when you notice that you're feeling overwhelmed, that you're acknowledging and validating your own experience and finding ways of coping and rejuvenating and finding ways to kind of refuel yourself. Best of luck with the rest of finals. I know you can do it. See what I did there? You could do it. You absolutely can do this. Ask for support as you're needing it. Right here. Best of luck, Cyclones. Happy end of semester.